Well, I'm excited about today's agenda.
Okay.
Without objection, the agenda is approved. And of course, we'll call the meeting to order for February 9th, 2021. First item, approval of the minutes from January 26th. Can we take a motion to approve?
Of order.
Moves approval.
Okay, second or whatever. I'll do a second.
Okay, so I have Wolf and Sterner.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll do roll call. Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin.
Aye.
Thank you. Lindstrom.
Zierens and I.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing on our consent agenda today. 3 items on our non-consent agenda. First one is some good news. As we know, the legislature appropriated $5 million for I&I grants. And Matt Selmeyer is going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Selmeyer. I'm the Budget Manager, Environmental Services, and I'm joined by Kyle Colvin, who is the Manager of Wastewater Planning and Community Programs. And as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, during the 2020 legislative session, Patty Nauman of Metro Cities advocated for funding to help reduce inflow and infiltration, and the legislature approved $5 million in state bond funds for the Metropolitan Council to administer another II grant program. Business item 2021-143 asks the Environment Committee to approve our II grant program guidelines as outlined in Attachment A and authorizes the regional administrator to award grants and execute grant agreements per those guidelines. And it's important to note that these guidelines have not substantially changed from our previous state bond funded programs, and we will once again be using the N grant process that we used in both the 2014 2017 II grant programs. And in reference to the guidelines, cities are deemed eligible to participate in the inflow and infiltration grant program if they had recent flow rates that are within 20% of their allowable flow limit, which is set by the Wastewater Planning and Capital Delivery Team. For this program, we have 80 cities that are eligible, and we have added 2 more since our last program, which includes Hastings and Rosemount. Some of the key guidelines for the II program include: the grant must be for capital improvements in the municipal wastewater system. Grant appropriations are for up to 50% of the cost to mitigate II. That's actually a state guideline that's written in the bonding bill language. And the costs of studies, engineering, and planning are not eligible, as these funds are intended to support the infrastructure improvements themselves. And on Wednesday, January 27th, we held a virtual information session to gather input and discuss the proposed guidelines for the grant program. This was an opportunity to review key state requirements, our proposed guidelines, a funding example, and to discuss the benefits of reducing inflow and infiltration. And as the program is not changing from previous format, from our previous format, cities seem to have minimal inquiries and feedback. With that said, the feedback and questions we did receive were all for the purposes of clarification of the program calendar or work eligibility. And leading up to the event, we also took questions and feedback, and several city representatives seemed very excited that we're having another program. And I believe, Mr. Chair, that you were in attendance for that meeting, and I want to thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
As far as the grant process, if this business item is approved, it will go to the council on February 24th. Once the council approves these guidelines, we can solicit for application to the program, and eligible work for this grant must occur between January 1st, 2021 and December 31st, 2022. And we're not making major changes, but it is one that I'd like to mention is that these dates are aligned with the calendar year, something we haven't always done in the past. And our inflow and infiltration program is also aligned with the calendar year. And we're working to align the 2 programs to reduce the amount of paperwork required for participating communities in our II program and II grant program. So we're targeting to solicit for applications in early March. And following the receipt of applications which will tentatively be due on April 16th. We will send cities a notification that includes a preliminary minimal allocation and an estimated final reimbursement amount. With that said, please note, while we will send reimbursement estimates, they in no way guarantee any amount, as all final reimbursements are contingent on work being completed and determined at the end of the grant program. In addition, we fully expect to need to prorate our awards as demand has historically exceeded fund availability. I have a couple of quick facts here to share. In 2014, we had $9.5 million of eligible expenditures for the program, and we had a pot of $4.2 million to pay. And in 2017, we had 11.7 million eligible and 8.7 million to pay. So it's a desirable and used program. Cities will then have until December 31st, 2022 to complete work, and paperwork that verifies project specifics such as cost information will be due by March 31st, 2023. And then finally, we'll calculate each city's reimbursement and send grant agreements for final signature by May 1st, 2023, and we'll process the payments once we have final signed grant agreements. In terms of Thrive, this program supports our sustainability outcome because this helps keep municipal infrastructure in good working order, and funds from this program help encourage cities to work on their wastewater infrastructure, which benefits the overall metropolitan disposal system. And with that said, we are looking for your approval of these guidelines, and I will turn it over for any questions or comments.
Questions or comments?
Chair Lindstrom, this is Susan. Committee member Zarin asked if we needed to have the appropriated announcement, the governor's announcement, read as part of this or not.
Mr. Chair, members of the Environment Committee, we have not done that in the past, but we have included language in the specific guidelines that you are approving today. So that is included in what's in those guidelines that we're asking for your approval on.
This is Councilmember Zarin, Chair Lindstrom.
Yeah, please.
I guess a point of order is my question. Typically, we start our environmental committee meetings with the notice read at the beginning. So I'm just inquiring to ask if that still needs to be read at the beginning of the meeting here, because we didn't do that.
Sure, good question. And actually, I I was just thinking about that before our meeting, and typically we actually don't, or have not in a long time, read that notice. I know that other people, I know that that is read for our full council meetings, and I know it's read for the community development committee. I can read it, and I will read it. This is just so everybody knows what Councilmember Zarin is referring to. And the notice is Governor Walz has declared a peacetime emergency. This is Executive Order 20-01 in response to COVID-19, and the Metropolitan Council Chair has determined it is not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person Environment Committee meeting for reasons stated in the Governor's Emergency Executive Order. Accordingly, Environment Committee members will participate in this meeting via telephone or other electronic means, and the Environment Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota statutes section 13D.021 at the date and time stated above. This meeting will be streamed live and recorded. We encourage you to monitor the meeting remotely. Thank you, Council Member. Any other questions on this item? Councilmember Wolf.
I don't have a question. Can I move approval?
You can. I have a question real quickly, or a request. And I can't remember if I've already made this request and I perhaps even already received the information. My brain is a little fried as well, but the 80 cities that are eligible, I'd love to see at least the cities that are eligible in District 10, um, if that's possible. And again, you may have already sent that to me not that long ago, but if you don't mind resending that, that would be great. And perhaps the other council members may be interested in that information as well, or maybe other council members broadly across the council may be interested.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, we certainly can provide that information. We have all 80 cities listed. Be just a little bit more to break them out into the districts, but that's certainly something we can get for you guys.
And even if you could just send me the link to the 80 cities or a document with 80 cities, I can take it from there. That'd be great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, this is Vento. I'd appreciate that. Thank you for making that request.
Absolutely. Okay, motion has been made. Is there a second?
I'll second that. This is Councilmember Sterner.
Thank you. Motion's been made and seconded. Roll call, please.
Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Zarin's an aye.
Lindstrom.
Zarin's an aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us to our second item, which we've seen before in various versions. The adopt the facility plan for the Fridley Lift Station, L32A. Mr. Wadeen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Tim Woodine. I am the assistant manager, or one of the assistant managers with the Interceptor Engineering Group at the Wastewater Planning and Capital Project Delivery Division of the council. I'm here to present to you on business item 2021-44, requesting the approval or the adoption of the facility plan for the Fridley Lift Station L32A project, MCES project number 809400. Next slide, please. My presentation tonight, I'll summarize the facility plan that we've prepared, summarize the steps that we have taken to date, and summarize the next steps, what we're doing next with this project. So as a reminder, our existing lift station, L32, is located in Brooklyn Park at 7700 Mississippi Lane North. It's the red dot that is on the west side, or the left side of the Mississippi River in this image. Our proposed lift station, the future L32A, will be located in Fridley at 6900 East River Road, which is on the east side of the Mississippi River. The dashed line that you see is approximately the property that we own in Fridley, where we will construct the proposed lift station. Next slide, please. A little background, the L32 lift station is about 50 years old. It was constructed back in the 1970s as a part of the North Suburban Sanitary Sewer District, and components such as the structure, piping, and controls are starting to show signs of deterioration and require replacement. Failures at the lift station have resulted in backups of wastewater into area homes, and there have been odor complaints due to an inability to address airflow at the current facility. Finally, the lift station is almost at full capacity with the existing flow conditions. Next slide, please. Our two main drivers for the project are first, the age of the existing lift station. At 50 years old, it's essentially reached the end of its useful life. Our condition assessments have documented structural, mechanical, and electric deficiencies, which have led to system failures, including backups and odor issues. The existing lift station is also almost to its full pumping capacity. The L32 site, or the L32 location, does not have sufficient capacity to serve the current and future needs of the area. Next slide, please. As a part of our facility plan, we reviewed several or three different alternatives, and this alternative that we selected was to construct a new lift station on the east side of the Mississippi River in Fridley. And this alternative includes construction of new facilities on the east side of the river in Fridley, which include a new pump station to meet future flow and resiliency needs, an independent pump system in that lift station that will help provide system resiliency in the event of a failure, odor control systems to manage odorous air and liquid phase odor-causing compounds, and flow metering of the wastewater leaving the lift station. The west side will still have facilities located at the Brooklyn Park side of the property. We will need to maintain an odor control building at that location, as we will have a head house that will serve the siphon. The siphon structure in the head house will conduct wastewater underneath the Mississippi River, so we'll have facilities related to that in Brooklyn Park. Again, the odor control system that I mentioned, and we're also proposing two smaller submersible lift stations upstream of the existing L32 facility to help mitigate some resiliency challenges that we have on the west side of the facility. It's basically to prevent wastewater from backing up into low-lying service connections. Finally, we'll be rehabilitating two of the four pipes that cross the existing Mississippi, or across the Mississippi River. We'll be converting all four of them from force mains into a siphon, which will conduct wastewater underneath the Mississippi River. Next slide, please. This gives us a conceptual site plan for our selected alternative. This is at the east side in Fridley at 6900 East River Road. You can see that we are proposing an 8-pump lift station that will include generators for backup emergency situations, an odor control system, and some other improvements or some other additions that make the lift station whole. You can see the existing force main is just on the south side of the property. We would be reconnecting to that force main to continue pumping wastewater to the east. We're located off of the property line, and we did when we evaluated the system, we've estimated that we're at least 100 feet away from the nearest homes in the area. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. As I mentioned, we'll still have presence on the west side or in the Brooklyn Park side of the project. This shows our existing property and the existing control building, which is about where we'd be holding or constructing a new control building on the west side of the facility, or the west side at 7700 Mississippi Lane. The small house-shaped box on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, is the proposed siphon structure, which would allow wastewater to enter the 4 siphon pipes that are underneath the Mississippi River. We would need to include a temporary diversion structure along that pipe route to make sure that we are continuing to maintain flow through this location. There's quite a bit of flow that comes here, and we can't just stop moving wastewater. We would also include a generator system to make sure that we are providing emergency power for this location in the event of a power failure. To give you an idea of the scale of the property here, this parcel, or what we're looking at here, is about 1.5 acres of property. We're estimating that on the east side of the property, we'll need about 7 acres of property to fully contain the new facility and construction limits. Next slide, please. We've gone through and estimated, as a part of our facility plan, the ultimate construction cost of our recommended alternative. including everything that I've discussed, our new 8-pump lift station, the addition of 2 smaller submersible lift stations, dedicated pumps at that 8-pump lift station for backup systems, new order control systems on both the east and west side, flow metering, siphon improvements. We're looking at a total of about $51 million. This is a budgetary cost right now, and as we further develop the project, further develop the design, we'll become much closer to a complete number on that project. But the funding for the design construction has already been included in the 2021 capital program. Next slide, please. To date, we've had a number of milestones that we've met. You may recall back on November 10th, we had a public information meeting or an open house for the residents of Fridley and Brooklyn Park to introduce them to the meeting, or to introduce them to the project. We also had a public hearing on December 17th, and I'd like to thank Chair Lindstrom for helping us convene that meeting. I think it went very well, and we heard a number of comments at that meeting. We continued to keep that public comment period open until December 28th and received a number of comments, written comments from residents and several organizations interested in the project. At the February 24th Metropolitan Council meeting, we will consider adoption of the facility plan. And if that facility plan is adopted, we will shortly send that off to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the Public Facilities Authority for inclusion in the intended use plan for funding. Project design is scheduled to start in 2021 and last through 2023, with project construction started in 2023, lasting through 2026. Next slide, please. These next 2 slides are a summary of the comments that we've received as a part of the open house or the public hearing process. Some of these were provided to us as written comments during the public hearing, the comment period. Some of these were provided to us at the public hearing itself. Friends of the Mississippi River spoke with us about the project and provided written comments discussing the design standards to be used for the proposed project. We've confirmed that with them that we'll be using our applicable design standards, such as the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area Rules, as well as other design standards that we've discussed, such as bird safe design. We've also spoken with Anoka County, who provided written comments about access to the new facilities. Their main concerns were work within the right-of-way and access from the East River Road. As I mentioned here, we will coordinate with the county during design to make sure that we're locating that site access properly and acquiring the necessary permits, coordinating our work during design. Residents during the meeting and after the meeting in written email comments did raise questions about odor and odor control at this new location. So as we've stated, the project will include state-of-the-art odor control facilities at both sites, both the east site and the west site. Siting of the buildings are also going to help mitigate odor issues at this location. The other thing that we've talked about is that we will be able to mitigate but not completely eliminate odors at these locations. And that'll chiefly be because during periods where we are changing out the media and the filter equipment that removes the odor-causing compounds, there'll probably be some minor escape of odors during those times, but those will be relatively short and limited during the year. There was also a resident question about storing of effluent at that location. We've confirmed that we will not be storing effluent on the wastewater or the lift station site, primarily because stored effluent can be, or stored wastewater can be a source of odors, and we're trying to limit those as much as possible. We've also discussed system reliability. There's a question from the resident about system reliability. As I mentioned earlier, we'll include emergency generators, redundant pumps, and other features that will help maintain system reliability for our facility. We had a question about noise. Obviously, during construction, we'll have some noise that will happen just because of construction activities. We will be limiting hours of construction activity per city code. I believe that's typically between 7 a.m. and 6 o'clock p.m. But we'll confirm that with the city as we move forward with the project and design. That will be a requirement in the contract documents. Furthermore, once the facility is in operation, we will need to design the facility such that it meets noise ordinances for the area. So we'll be working with the design consultant and the city of Fridley to make sure that we're meeting those noise ordinances. One of the bigger questions that we received from residents and has been a big question among a number of people has been the use of the excess property. As I mentioned, we're looking at about 7 acres of that property that we'll need to use. There is a total of 22 acres of property that we own in that location. And so the question has come up of what we intend to do with the last 15 acres that isn't needed for a lift station. We have been having a lot of discussion with the city of Fridley. We will continue to have those discussions as far as what that excess property will be used for. We've come up with a number of ideas, including construction of single-family housing in that area and retention by MCES of that area as a buffer area and using it more as a public amenity, possibly with the construction of trails, possibly with the construction of a canoe launch in that location. Those discussions will continue with the city of Fridley as we get closer to understanding what exactly we need for the facility itself. Next slide, please. Anoka County has requested that we continue to hold public meetings as we go through our project. We will continue to have public outreach with the project. We have also offered to hold additional meetings as the project proceeds. And Chair Lindstrom did reach out to the Anoka County and graciously offered to help convene those meetings. And we appreciate that offer. Fridley City Council has also discussed with us the aesthetics of the lift station. We did share a number of images of various lift stations throughout our system, including lift station L73 in Woodbury, lift station L71 in Chaska, and lift station L27 in Hopkins to give them an idea of what a lift station can look like. We pointed out that none of these lift stations really look similar, and we try to focus that design or design those buildings around the character of the area. But then we'll also work with the city as far as the architectural design on the project. Finally, there was a discussion about the location of the lift station on the site. There was some discussion on moving it further into the property, further away from homes. Our response there was that we need to balance the separation between the facilities and the neighbors and the proximity of the existing pipes. We do want to keep that away from people, but we need to make sure that we're close enough for the hydraulics of the system to make sure that wastewater gets from the siphon to the new lift station location. The facility plan, materials, public hearing summary are all available at the project website with the address listed on this slide. Next slide, please. Our proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council adopt the facility plan for the Fridley Lift Station L32A project, MCES project number 809400, per resolution 2021-5, which is attached to the business item. At this point in time, I'll take any questions.
Excellent. Any questions for Mr. Wadeen?
Chair Lindstrom, at this time, I'd like to acknowledge Councilmember Sterner has a question.
Very good. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Chair Lindstrom, this was look at the charges, and it occurs to me that they might be high, but I don't know the 22% administrative and engineering design and the 30% construction contingency. Can you maybe just talk about those compared to other projects and this one? But it just seemed like from my past experience, seems like they're up a little bit higher percent than what I've seen before.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. It's an excellent question. With the status of our project right now, where we're in the preliminary design phase of the project, and there's still a lot of unknowns that we need to nail down, that is a standard percentage for what we use at this phase. So they do seem large, a 30% construction contingency, a 22% design contingency, but that is in line with how we design our projects. As we move forward and weed out some of these unknowns, get more of an understanding of what the uncertainties are, further identify the challenges with, for example, geotechnical information at that location, we'll be able to reduce those contingencies and have a closer or clearer understanding of the cost of the project.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good question. Others?
I do not see any other hands raised at this time.
I'm interested to see what everybody comes up with for the use on that property. I remember comments along the line of how Fridley it's a river town, but it really has very limited, if any, access to the Mississippi River right now. So I'm pleased to hear that that's an option that's being considered. So thank you very much. And we do need to take a vote. Is there a motion? Looks like I see the
Vento
thumbs
moves
up.
approval.
Oh, Vento moves approval. And is there a second?
Zarin seconds.
Roll call, please.
Fredson,
Chair, I was just thumbing up your comments, but I'm a yes.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure if that was you were making a motion or, but good. Just a general thumbs up. Great.
okay. Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Zarin's an aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to our third item, ratification of emergency declaration number 69 for environmental services disinfection chemicals supply. Mr. Ward, welcome.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Joe Ward. I'm a process engineer in the support services group, and I'm here today to talk to you about an emergency declaration for disinfection chemical supply. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start just giving you a little framework of what the disinfection chemicals are. And what you're seeing here is, first off, is bleach. Our sodium hypochlorite is used to remove pathogens from our wastewater, from the treated effluent. And what you're seeing on the right, just to give you a sense of scale, are the bleach tanks at the Metro plant and some of the injection equipment over there on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. Well, and I should have mentioned, I forgot that, so our bleach season by disinfection is required by MPCA permit. And our bleach season runs from April through October each year. And during those months, we inject bleach for the disinfection. And then following that, the last thing that we do before the wastewater leaves the plant is we, dechlorinate it. So we remove any excess bleach so that it doesn't harm the downstream aquatic life. And you can see from the photos there on the left especially that it's about the last thing we do before it leaves the plant. Before the wastewater leaves the plant anyway. Next slide, please. So just some background here. I was here a couple months ago for approval for purchase orders for bleach and bisulfite awarded to DPC under a 5-year contract. That was back in July. But then just after the start of the year on January 8th, we received an email with an attached letter that was dated December 16th that said DPC had sold their local plant to Hawkins Chemical and would not be in the market in Minnesota anymore. And so at first we were kind of surprised and thought, is this real? So we reached out to other municipalities that use bleach for drinking water and confirmed that this was actually the case. Other municipalities had the same experience. Next slide, please. So our emergency declaration supply period is through 2021, and the reason why we're in the emergency declaration situation is just simply for the short duration of time. We don't have time to go through the normal bidding process that usually takes several months, from January to starting our initial bleach and bisulfite orders and starting up equipment. We usually do that in March. And so our peak season is April through October, as I mentioned. And then during that peak season, it gets pretty hectic with tankers going all over to the different plants and filling and keeping us going. So what we plan to do is concurrently reach out for that, begin the new bidding process, for bleach and bisulfite for that 4 to 5 year contract while we are in this emergency declaration period in 2021. And the estimated cost for our bleach this year would be $600,000, and for bisulfite, $300,000. Next slide, please. So the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council ratify emergency declaration number 69 attached to the business item and authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a purchase order for disinfection chemical supply. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Very good, thank you. Any questions? Not seeing or hearing any. Do we have a motion?
Wolf moves approval.
And a second?
Turner seconds.
All right, roll call, please.
Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Zarin's aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And that takes us through our non-consent business agenda and on to our information items, where our first one, we have an update on the COVID-19 monitoring. And presenting that, Mr. Sprouse, and a few others, perhaps.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for allowing us to provide an update on MCS's research on the potential for wastewater monitoring to track COVID-19 prevalence. I'm George Sprouse. I'm the manager of the Process Engineering R&D and Air Quality Group of MCS Support Services, and I'm joined with my colleague, Steve Balog, who is a principal research scientist in our group. As you may recall, at the May 12th, 2020 Environment Committee meeting, we provided an information item on contaminants of emerging concern. And due to the situation at that time, the most significant emerging concern was COVID-19. So we presented information on the developing pandemic-inspired interest in wastewater-based epidemiology. We identified several research activities on the subject that MCS was getting involved with. Today, we will provide an update on the current status of our work on this topic. Next slide, please. Currently, we are involved in 4 research activities looking at the potential for using wastewater information to help determine the prevalence of COVID-19 in our community. First, MCS is monitoring the influence of the Metro plant for the genetic material of the COVID-19 virus. We began this effort using BioBot, a contract lab that was an early advocate and resource for this type of monitoring. As 2020 continued, we repurposed some of our existing laboratory space. We obtained the needed equipment, and we began to perform many of the key steps in-house. We are contracting now with the University of Minnesota Genomics Center for the analysis of our samples. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm goofed there. There were 3 other projects that I'm supposed to, if the slides could go back, that would be great. But if they can't, I'll follow. My apologies. In our second project, we are participating in and providing samples to a statewide research project led by the University of Minnesota Duluth Medical School. That project includes many of the state's wastewater plants, and we are providing 2 influent samples from each of our plants each week to that project. We are also participating in the National Wastewater Surveillance System project led by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We were accepted into phase 1 of that project, which is monitoring wastewater from about 10% of the U.S. population. We began sending Metropolitan influent samples to that project in January, and we will complete this initial phase of the project when we send tomorrow's sample. And the 4th project we're pursuing involves working with the University of Minnesota Genomics Center to see if our wastewater samples can provide information about the presence and prevalence of the various new strains of the virus that are popping up around the globe. In what follows, we'll present the data we have so far, and then conclude with a quick review and outlook for all the activities I've mentioned. Now we can go to the next. Before we get into the data, I'll point out that we are posting weekly data updates on our internal MetNet SharePoint site. You can see the page and link here. I want to mention that our purpose in sharing these data internally are to allow our executive management and internal stakeholders to monitor our progress and to illustrate why we're encouraged by the work we're doing. In this work, we're one contributor to a large wastewater utility and research community that is hoping to find and demonstrate a new practice for viral surveillance. The time pressure of the pandemic has changed the way science is being accomplished on this topic. Rather than the normal practice of science being completed prior to wider presentation and discussion, in this case, this community is sharing information quickly, and we are all getting to see science as it develops rather than as a final product. The following plots show our preliminary results only. They show preliminary results. These are only preliminary results. It may not reflect the final or ultimate outcome of this work. And with that, Steve will talk us through the results we have so far.
Thank you, George. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to you today. We've made significant progress on this important subject since I spoke to you last May, and I'm happy to now update you on our efforts. First, a little about what it is we are measuring. The material we collect and measure is the single-stranded ribonucleic acid, or RNA, that the virus uses to reproduce inside infected cells. This RNA has a very specific chemical fingerprint, which allows us to measure it at very low concentrations. We're not looking for the virus itself, but rather for fragments of the viral RNA that remain after the virus particles have broken down and become inactive. In this sense, our analysis is identical to the analysis of clinical samples. In both cases, we're measuring the concentrations of viral RNA, not the virus itself. So on to our data. Next slide, please. This first plot shows how the wastewater data for SARS-CoV-2 viral RNA in Metroplant Effluent have tracked the changing clinical case data for the metro area over the past 10 months. The gray bars show the number of new cases per day as a 7-day moving average, with values on the left axis. The red lines show the load of viral RNA entering the Metro plant over the same time period, also as a 7-day moving average, with values on the right axis. Beginning in April 2020, we contracted with Biobot to analyze weekly samples, and that data is plotted as the red line through the end of October. Since then, we have extracted viral RNA from the wastewater samples ourselves and had it analyzed at the university's Genomics Center. You can see that the wastewater data accurately tracked the changing clinical case signal across the large November-December surge and is now settling down at a lower level in line with the lower clinical case numbers. The close correspondence of our wastewater data with the completely independent clinical case data gives us confidence that wastewater monitoring can provide useful, possibly actionable data regarding the prevalence of COVID-19 in our community. One aspect of our analysis going forward will be to determine if the wastewater signal might actually lead the clinical data. There is some indication of this in other studies. In this case, upward or downward trends in disease prevalence might show up first in the wastewater, giving public health authorities advance notice of changing circumstances. Next slide, please. The second plot here lifts the hood, so to speak, on how we are generating these data. As in the previous slide, the gray bars show the clinical case data. Our wastewater data is now shown in the green and orange lines, with values again on the right. These lines show the concentrations of the two target gene fragments called N1 and N2 that we extract and measure in Metroplant Effluent. These genes are the specific and unique pieces of the SARS-CoV-2 RNA we search for in our analysis. The N2 concentrations are consistently higher than the N1 concentrations, reflecting differences perhaps in how well different parts of the viral RNA survive in the human body and in wastewater, as well as differences in how well our analytical methods can detect these two different genes. To calculate the viral load shown in the previous slide, we simply average these N1 and N2 concentrations and multiply that number by the influent flow rate. We continue to learn how to do this kind of work, and we anticipate learning more in the months ahead. In particular, we are developing more sensitive techniques so we can measure the virus in our influent even when the disease prevalence in the community has dropped to only 1/10 of current levels. And we are working with our colleagues at the university's Genomics Center to develop techniques to characterize the presence and prevalence of several new viral strains of concern. In all of it, we are seeking to contribute to our community's response to and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and to develop tools and knowledge to prepare MCS for future challenges to come. And with that, I'll turn it back over to George.
Thank you, Steve. Next slide, please. So the slides that Steve provided gave information on our current in-house work. I'll now finish with a quick status update and outlook for all the activities we have going on. With regards to our in-house work, as Steve mentioned, we continue to develop and refine our capabilities, but we believe our methods are currently producing good data. Having said that, we want to emphasize that these data are still preliminary and we have not been peer reviewed yet. As such, they are subject to revision. Also, as Steve indicated, we have identified analytical improvements that will lower our detection limit, which will be important as the disease prevalence drops in the metro area. And although I didn't include it on the slide, we are also working with our GIS group to obtain and include case data more specific to the metro plant service area. With regards to the University of Minnesota Duluth Medical School project, as we understand it, that project will be continuing through September. They also report that they will have dashboards up and running very soon, and that will allow participants to see information about the plans. On the National Wastewater Surveillance System project, Data have not yet been released, but we have indications they will be providing information soon. And we have requested that the Metro plant be included in phase 2 of the project, which will increase the project's coverage to approximately 30% of the US population. Regarding our work with the University of Minnesota Genomics Center on searching for new variants of concern in wastewater, we are providing special and specific samples based on their input for this investigation. As you can imagine, as the slides indicate, they are busy. We will continue to communicate and work with them to pursue this initiative. Next slide, please. That concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time today. We are happy to answer any questions.
Fascinating, thank you. Any anecdotes yet on how this has been actionable, either here or around the nation, or is it still to be determined?
Well, I could answer, George. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I think most of the activity that has been actionable thus far has been localized sampling, like at universities or health systems, where sampling has looked at wastewater coming directly from buildings or areas, limited areas, not necessarily a whole wastewater treatment plant service area. So as far as, but having said that, I believe there are probably smaller communities where they could point to this method and this science as yielding some data that has been useful to them.
It'd be interesting for us to know, like, because we had this data, we therefore took this action in our community.
Yep.
Yeah.
We can look into that.
Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. Just two things. One, anecdotally, I just think this is another example of how the Metropolitan Council is working with entities across the entire state of Minnesota to tackle challenges that we're facing, not only as a region, but as a state. And so the partnership with UMD is a good example. But one question I wanted to ask, and if I misunderstood or just didn't catch it, please let me know. But I'm wondering if we're looking for these additional strains versus just the COVID-19 strain.
Steve can, Chair, Steve can help me with this one. In the major part of the work, we're looking for the virus. In the last section that I mentioned, the Genomics Center is really experts in this, and we are coordinating with them to get into that part of the science. It's not as well developed as the monitoring the virus. It's really kind of the cutting edge of the cutting edge. So of the four things I mentioned, it's really that fourth one that gets at that point.
Mr. Chair and members, I could maybe add that the measurements that we do measure all of the viral strains, and the particular targets that of the RNA that we're looking for are present in all of the strains, including the new viral strains of concern. So we're seeing it all. To specifically look for those new strains that may be more transmissible or have less reactivity to vaccines, for instance, we need to look for other indicators on the RNA, specific gene mutations that we don't look for in our ordinary analysis. So that's what the university is now focused on with the next generation sequencing of the RNA to look for those particular mutations.
Great question.
Thank you.
Other comments?
Chair Lindstrom, this is Councilmember Zarin.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. you know, I really find it interesting. It's completely fascinating. Um, my question is around, you know, being able to see it as a leading factor. How long does it take from when you take a sample of the effluent to the time you have a completed test? And how much of a lead time does that help with epidemiology and this seeing the trends? Is there any indication that that this will give us days more or hours more, or is there a new test coming where you could basically have it in the affluent and be able to press a button and get a get an analysis? Could you speak on that, please?
Chair and members of the committee, Steve again will help me with this. The general feeling and results of the community working on this is that wastewater in cases has either been shown or will believe to be a leading indicator. But it's part of the research, you know, that's what we're looking into basically. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I think there is things in the literature that are indicative of that. With part of the reason we're looking into getting better data on the service area and the data analysis we're doing is to be better refined in that scope. And maybe Steve can speak to how quickly it goes from being a sample to potentially being a reported value for us. Steve, if you could take that one, please. Thanks.
Sure. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, what we do is we get a sample of Metro Influent. I want to be clear that we're looking at the influent coming into the wastewater treatment plant. Each day we get a daily sample of the daily composite influent. And for us to do the extraction of the RNA in that sample, it only takes an hour or so. So, you know, we can have our RNA sample ready to go very quickly. There's a problem getting our sample to the university in a timely manner and doing it in enough quantity of samples so that they can use their scalability of all of their technology to do this efficiently. So basically at this point, what we do is we store our samples for a week. Every week we take one batch of samples over to the university and they analyze them and we get our data back from them within 2 days, which is really good turnaround time because they're actually very swamped with all the clinical stuff they're doing. So, you know, in a perfect world, we could rush our sample over to the university every day and get it analyzed, and so have numbers, you know, within a couple days even. That just isn't feasible at the moment with what we've got. But you know, we can definitely look towards compressing that time scale so that we do have faster information if we do need it. I guess if that answers your question.
Chair Landstrom. Yeah, I thank you for correcting me. I was using the word affluent instead of influent. There is a difference there. I understand the difference. I just misspoke there. But that does absolutely answer my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Keep up the good work. This is really fascinating. And like Councilmember Fredson said, I'm really pleased that we are partnering with the University of Minnesota and genetics or a genomics center and the University of Minnesota Duluth Medical Center and CDC and others. So come on back in a little while and keep us updated.
Thank you very much.
Certainly will. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. And that takes us to our second information item, the Priority Waters Project. And Emily Bussinger is going to provide us with an update. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Emily Ressiger, and I'm an environmental analyst in the Water Resources section of Environmental Services. I'm also the project manager on this Priority Waters project. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge others who are here with me today. I'm joined by Henry McCarthy in Water Supply Planning, Eric Herberg in Water Resources, and both of them are part of our core project team, as well as Judy Spentek, the manager of the Water Resources section, who is the project owner. I'll be presenting, but Eric, Henry, and Judy are available for questions as needed. Next slide. Today I'll be going over some history and reasons for completing this project, briefly tell you about our approach and current status, and then I'm hoping we have some good time left for feedback from the committee and to answer any questions. Before moving on to the next slide, I do want to point out the photos that are at the bottom of a number of these slides. These are photos taken throughout the Metro by council staff that evoke and show the different ways we use our surface waters. Please enjoy them, and I hope they may expand your thinking about how we value our water resources throughout the region, especially in the dead of winter where we don't get to interact with them quite as much. Next slide. The other thing I want to say before we get started is that we're here today to inform the committee about this project, but also to ensure the work we are doing reflects the committee and the council's priorities and values. As you're viewing this presentation, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'd ask you to keep the following questions in mind. Is staff using the right approach to prioritize waters? Are we missing a significant use or benefit of lakes, rivers, and streams? What categories of use and benefit should be given more weight in the priority waters list? Some of these questions will make more sense as we get into the presentation, but just try and keep them in mind. Next slide. The Priority Waters Project is an effort begun in the Water Resources section of Environmental Services last year. The purpose of the project itself is to establish a regional priority waters list that will be used to guide the council in helping the region most effectively manage our lakes, rivers, and streams. This work will enable us to more effectively pursue two policies from the 2040 Water Resource Policy Plan. The Policy on Watershed approach, which says that the council will work with our partners to develop and implement a regional watershed-based approach that addresses both watershed restoration, improving impaired waters, and protection, maintaining water quality in unimpaired waters. And the Policy on Assessing and Protecting Regional Water Resources, which says that the council will continue to assess the condition of the region's lakes, rivers, and streams, and aquifers to evaluate impact on regional water resources and measure success in achieving regional water goals. Next slide. Our region's lakes, rivers, and streams also relate well to all 5 Thrive outcomes. Stewardship asks us to responsibly manage our water resources. Lakes and streams support prosperity by bringing people to the region. Equity asks us to ensure all residents have access to high-quality water. High-quality drinking water and recreational opportunities improve the livability of the region. And finally, sustainability asks us to protect our waters for future generations. Next slide. The Council on Environmental Services have a long history of prioritizing our waters. This idea was first brought forward in the 1982 Council Water Resources Management Plan. And then a prioritized approach was pursued again in 2003, which resulted in a priority lakes list being included in the 2005 Water Resource Management Policy Plan. That was the 2030 plan. The most recent 2040 Water Resources Plan updated that 2030 list with adding some criteria to that 2030 list. Next slide. That's quite a bit of the background on this project. So why do we need a prioritized list? While we live in the land of 10,000 lakes, we also live in the region of almost 1,000 lakes. In the Metro, we have over 950 lakes and hundreds of miles of rivers and streams. As the council completes its projects and initiatives, without prioritization, it can be hard to know where to focus first and foremost. Some examples of this include our group does significant monitoring on rivers, lakes, and streams on our own and with partners. Are we currently monitoring the right ones? Staff attend meetings and provide technical support on plans and projects throughout the region. Are there some of those we should be prioritizing first? During ES and transit construction projects, are there certain waters we need to elevate in our levels of protection? And there's some more shown on the screen. While this list of applications is not final, it gives you an idea of how the list could be used. So this list is a chance to recognize that staff and financial resources have opportunity costs. If we spend time and money on one lake, we may not have any resources left to spend on another lake. Next slide. The current priority lakes list was included in the 2040 Water Resource Policy Plan. It is currently used primarily to set monitoring and assessment priorities, especially council staff lake monitoring priorities. For that list, lakes were prioritized based on their high recreational value, whether they provided water supply, whether they had good water quality, and whether they were significant for wildlife. Next slide. For the new priority waters list, our goal is to build on the prioritization successes of the existing priority lakes list while also expanding to prioritize rivers and streams. The list is being put together now so that it can be one of the central pillars of the 2050 Water Resources Policy Plan, which is currently in its early stages of development. How we craft policy around water resources should be influenced by our water priorities. I do want to emphasize this list is being developed first and foremost for internal use. Of course, the council's priorities should reflect those of the region, and we are hopeful if this list is developed well and it resonates with partners, they may consider adopting it, or at least parts of it. But we're not using this list to tell communities or watersheds that they must structure their programs around these waters. Next slide. So there are different ways we could prioritize waters. We could target the dirtiest waters first for cleanup. We could look at water body size. We could look at number of public investments. In fact, many of our partners, including state agencies and watersheds, focus almost solely on devoting resources based on water quality and water quality impairments. However, as a regional planning agency, we felt priorities should reflect our and the region's values. And as far back as the 1982 policy plan, the council has been focusing this prioritization work on how humans use or potentially use water resources. This reflects the impact of water resources on people. We decided to continue this approach. So our approach to this project is reflected in this draft definition and purpose of the list statement shown here. The priority waters list is those waters the council has determined to be regionally significant based on their uses and benefits. The council will prioritize dedicating resources to these waters to help maintain and improve their valued qualities for present and future generations. When you approach water resources from a use perspective, you quickly move broader than just water quality. An example is Como Lake. Como Lake has fairly poor water quality, but it's highly used within the region for boating, picnicking, walking, biking, because of its location in a regional park near a highly populous area. Next slide. We went through a long and very thorough discernment process internally to decide on these draft use categories. We eventually expanded use to include benefits as well, which is less direct than use, but also highly valued. So looking at benefits alongside use allows us to include the healthy habitat category, for instance. I'll just briefly walk through what these 11 categories mean. Drinking water supply focuses on waters used or reserved for public water supply. This both includes lakes and rivers used directly for drinking water, but also waters that are closely connected to underlying groundwater supplies. Provisioning is waters used to harvest vegetation or animals for consumption, such as fish or wild rice. Equity is waters that support use by underserved populations. This may mean proximity to underserved communities, or it may mean waters that are easily accessible by transit or other factors. Direct recreation means waters that are used specifically for recreational activities in or on the water, such as swimming, boating, and fishing. Adjacent recreation is related to direct recreation, but it's waters with recreational opportunities on their shores or nearby areas. This mostly looks at waters in regional, state, and federal parks, or those that have adjacent trails to be used. Industrial and utility means waters used for economic industrial benefits like power generation, or utility benefits like diluting treated waste. Cultural and spiritual significance includes historical sites near waters near historical sites, or waters near sites that are sacred to specific cultural communities. Natural and tranquil connection means waters that provide a mindful connection with the environment, which usually tends to mean waters that are quieter and more remote. Healthy habitat is waters that provide good habitat for native vegetation and wildlife to thrive. Environmental education and engagement is waters used for education and engagement, such as those including that are near nature centers or summer camps. And finally, scientific value is waters used for academic, professional, or citizen science. Next slide. I don't want to get too in the weeds about our quantitative approach to this list, but I'll dive in a little just so you understand the level of effort here. For each of the 11 categories I just shown, we have selected metrics. These are quantifiable data sets like beach locations or water supply lakes. This process is challenging and imperfect. We need to select metrics that are already available or straightforward to create by our team. Currently, we're working with about 90 metrics for the 11 categories, but we have been constantly refining these. After we've selected all those metrics, we create a metric score for each water body. Many of these are yes, no. Does a lake have a beach or does it not? Others are categories such as when the DNR assigns a 1 to 5 rating for land cover habitat quality. Finally, others are continuous variables like the population near a lake. We then combine the different metric scores into one category score per water body by weighing the individual metric scores, and then we are finalizing how the individual list will be scored and prioritized. What we do know is there will be one overall list for lakes and another for rivers and streams. Our goal in this process is to be quantitative and transparent so that our work is defensible and we can pass along our method to any partners who are interested. However, the metrics and scoring are by definition involve valuing and values, and that's very qualitative in nature. Finally, as we think about the scoring, we're also having to balance between actual use and benefit and then potential use and benefit. If a lake is on a major bus line, that means people can take the bus to get there, but do they? Infrastructure such as buses, trails, and fishing piers give people the ability to use a water, but they don't tell us how much is actually used. We are exploring a tool that the council subscribes to called Streetlight that is able to look at flows of people into and out of locations using cell phone data, and this could help us with actual use, and that exploration is ongoing right now. Next slide. Just to let you know where we're at in this project, we have decided on an approach in categories and metrics, as we've shown. Though we understand these could change after our discussion today. We are currently determining methods to score individual metrics and categories. And then the goal is a preliminary list of waters by March 15th, at which point we will reach out to partners, including cities, counties, and watersheds to get feedback on our approach and whether the list is useful to them. Our goal is to revise and finalize the list by the end of May, at which time we can publish the list and work to integrate it into the upcoming Water Resources Policy Plan. We hope to be able to return to this committee and present the final list as well as discuss applications of the list at a later date. Next slide. So at the beginning of this presentation, I put forward these 3 questions that you see on screen again, along with a reminder of the prioritization categories. So Mr. Chair and members of the committee, at this point, I would open the floor for feedback on these questions or on anything with this project, as well as any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. And you said this, I believe, and I think I just missed it. So a lake gets on the priority list. Tell me the impact. Tell me again the impact of that. You mentioned Como Lake, for example, that say that that scores well. And it's on the list. You mentioned how it's historically had a lot of issues. What happens? It's on the list.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that question. It really depends on why it's on the list and then what kind of work we are currently doing. So we'll have these different categories. I think that could influence, if something's on the list for recreation versus for healthy habitat, I think that could influence how it's used. But a lot of it is what work we're currently doing. So the best example I have is for Como Lake. They actually had a management plan recently where they had a technical advisory committee for that management plan. And our staff went to that technical advisory committee, provided lake expertise, and spent time that they could have spent on something else at that meeting. And so, in the future, we might look at being invited to that technical advisory committee, say, is this on our list? No, maybe we should, check in with them, see what they need, but maybe we should pass this on to another partner because this isn't one of our priorities. So it really will depend on, maybe we're looking at our monitoring programs. We see Como Lake is a priority. That doesn't mean we will monitor it, but we will probably say, is a partner monitoring it? Are we getting good information so that we understand enough about Como Lake? Yes. Then we're going to put, in our reports, Como Lake has good resources devoted to it. Check, we feel good about that. If it doesn't, if we look and see, nobody's monitored Como Lake in 10 years, do we need to fit it into our monitoring program to ensure that we have information to make decisions about Como Lake? So a lot of it depends on the programs we already have, and then programs that may grow through the next policy plan. So this list has been a bit of a chicken and an egg. Sometimes we're saying, what's the point of the list? That will develop the priorities. But then if the list is developed well, I think it will drive work we can't imagine. So, yeah.
That's super helpful. Yep,
Thank
I
you.
totally get it. Yep, thank you. Feedback from the committee.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
this is Sue, Councilmember Vento. I thank you for this presentation. I was really looking forward to this, and I wish I was more visibly present for it, the meeting. But I'm curious, when you talk about partners, could you give some examples of partners? And then I have a couple of follow-up questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Bento. In water resources, we have a number of partners, some of whom are customers, some of whom are not. With our stream monitoring program, our watershed outlet program, WAMP, we provide some grant money to have partners in the community who are watershed districts, watershed management organizations, some cities and counties to do monitoring alongside of us. They do some monitoring, we manage their data, we help assess it with them. So I would consider watershed districts, management organizations, counties, and cities. And then for our camp lake volunteer monitoring program, we work with a number of cities who then have residents who volunteer to monitor their lakes. So those are the majority of them. I would also say that state agencies, the Pollution Control Agency and the DNR, we have some formal agreements with them, and sometimes we just work alongside them more informally. So when I talk about partners for water resources, it's all of those and probably something I'm forgetting.
Okay. What about the possibility of environmental nonprofits?
Thank you, Councilmember Bento and Chair Lindstrom. I think that is something that we could talk about. I don't think currently we don't partner with any nonprofits, but I would have to get back to you. We could talk about exactly what that looks like, but I think that we'd be open to that possibility.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I have one more question.
Please.
I'm thinking about the, as an example, the St. Croix River, which is, borders Minnesota and Wisconsin, and it's on the wild and scenic. It's designated as a wild and scenic river, so it's nationally recognized. And I'm wondering if that, or even the Mississippi and the portion of the Mississippi here in the metro area that's a national park, if there's any possibility that there would be resources available from the U.S. Department of Interior and the recently passed Land Water Act that might assist in these efforts. This just seems like such an invaluable program and might be worth just kind of checking around. A member of our congressional delegation here in the metro area was the ranking Democrat on the Interior Committee in the House Appropriations Subcommittee. Although she's not in that role, she certainly still has the influence within the Appropriations Committee, and I know Representative McCollum would be interested. But I'm just wondering if there might be dollars or other resources available that might help us in this effort?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Vento. I think that that's a really good idea, and I realized I did miss one partner, which is the U.S. Geological Survey. They do a lot of water monitoring, especially, and some assessment, and we do partner with them by providing them some funds on several of their, or at least one of their stream gauging stations to help us better understand the loads of different pollutants coming through our rivers. So we do work with them, and we also are part of a partnership on the St. Croix River that includes local folks, state agencies, and the USGS is fairly engaged on that as well. So I think that it would be great if we could look for additional resources there. But just so you know, we are pretty plugged in, and we've been, the USGS has been a great ally of ours for a number of years.
Great. And Mr. Chair, thank you very much. This is wonderful information. Thank you.
Great comments and questions. Others? Councilmember Fredson.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. One is I just want to say I appreciate the engagement prior to the presentation and asking us to consider some questions, and I think that was helping kind of focus preparation for this. So I have three questions I wanted to ask, or three questions or comments. One is just as it relates to the previous decision making or prioritization of waters. I'm wondering if you've applied that sort of equity lens, and is there any kind of connection between the waters that we've prioritized in the past and their proximity to BIPOC communities, and I'd be interested in I guess what we've learned from past prioritization to shape our decision making moving forward. The second was on the metrics. I'm a little confused as it relates to whether or not the application of the weighting or the scoring is done across the board from the get-go versus it came across to me like it was sort of we look at this body of water and then we make this decision or apply these scoring or weighting decisions versus just sort of across the board from the beginning. And then the third question I had was related to this slide that's in front of us now, and I'm wondering, it just would strike me that wouldn't we for sure like weight drinking water sources like at the top of the list across the board? I'm curious to know where access and just like clean water would fall. Assuming that, and I think that we face this challenge with I&I, right? With where there's clean water, obviously we want to prioritize it and keep it clean, and at the same time, we actually might focus our time and energy on water that's somewhere in the middle. And then lastly, I'm wondering if property tax values fall in here. I don't really see that anywhere on the chart, and I don't know if that would be all that progressive, but it was a question I asked myself, so I figured I'd ask it of you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Fredson. Those are all good questions and comments. And so just to start out with equity, so one of the really interesting things with this project is that it's sort of only as good as the data sets you have. And I think in the last 20 years, but even the last 10 years, the geospatial data that we have available is in such better shape, and there are so many more of them that I think 10 years ago, while equity was part of Thrive, we didn't always have especially good data sets that could really help us look at equity, and actually research has recently come out with a whole slew of equity data sets that we're trying to make use of here, which are really exciting because they've, before it was, the 50% poverty level, and, you could sort of use that, but now they're looking at concentrated areas of poverty, concentrated areas of affluence. and like I think they have like over 100 metrics. So at this point, we almost have too many metrics. So I think we actually have been really struggling with how to bring equity into this, and recently have decided to recommit. Like it was actually our most recent category that we added, and so I think in the past it wasn't included explicitly. And so that's something we're working to figure out. And I think that actually ties into your second question or comment, which was about metrics and weighting and whether we determine it all up front. It's really an adaptive approach, and that's not because we want to manipulate the outcome, but this is such a qualitative product, and we don't always know. Like we may say we want to put 70% weighting on this one metric, and then what it spits out are a whole bunch of tiny little ponds and not actually any of the lakes we expected it to. And then we realized that didn't work the way we wanted it to, and then we have to go back. So right now we're in a bit of a recursive adaptive point, but at some point we're going to decide these are the weightings we want, and we're going to see what comes out, and then try and take a little bit step back of a lens and say, did we manipulate this or does this pass muster? So right now we don't know what any of the weights, that's why we're getting feedback from you all on what you really would like to weight heavily, but we are going to do it sort of over and over again. And so I really appreciate the feedback on drinking water and high water quality, and we'll take those into consideration. Right now, property tax values are not being considered, and I know I'm part of some water planning efforts outstate that have used that as sort of the main way to value waters, or one of the main ways. Right now, we as a team have sort of taken that property values are generally don't reflect equity very well, and also don't. I think they do benefit the region though, so I think I'd be curious. I'd be curious what the committee feels about whether we should include those, because we certainly can if there's support for that. So thank you.
Thank you. When I think about drinking water and I think about equity, what comes to mind for me is environmental justice, and Flint, Michigan is just pops into my head immediately. And so ensuring that we incorporate the environmental justice to the extent that we can would be important for me. I also think about, I'm just such a big fan of citizen science, and which I know we do right now. And I think, are we monitoring like 150? I know you said there's 950 lakes, but it's something like 150 lakes that we are currently monitoring with the help of residents that live nearby. And I'm a big believer in that. I don't know how that fits into prioritizing these lakes, but just encouraging that activity and growing that to the extent that we can. I'm also becoming more and more aware of contaminants of emerging concern, and PFAS and all those not so good things. And so maybe that fits within scientific value or healthy habitat. But those are some of the things that I think about.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, this is
Yep.
Wendy Wolf. As far as the property value thing goes, I'd be a little worried about that when you're comparing like the areas that have farmland to Lake Minnetonka or something, because if you have $1 million farm, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily wealthy. You could be losing money from year to year and not be a wealthy person. You just have land available to farm, versus if you're living in $1 million house on Lake Minnetonka, in terms of equity there, depending on how farming is going, you can have a pretty expensive plot of land and still lose money. So, I want to be sensitive to the rural versus urban parts of that. I also am concerned about the collective metrics skewing towards highly populated areas and missing some of the more rural lakes and streams. Vermilion River in Scott and Dakota County, I think is an important one that doesn't necessarily have a ton of people living along it, but I don't want to get where we're only worried about the ones that have lots of people around them, because there's other ones that are important to the region for natural reasons and habitat and all of that I don't want to get so focused on how many people are around and what they're doing there that we miss out on some jewels of the region just because they're not in where a lot of people are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Wolf. That's duly noted, and I just want to let you know that many of us on the project team are also very concerned about that, and I think the natural and tranquil connection category, which is a little non-traditional, but I think it is one alongside healthy habitats that really does favor those kinds of waters, and that was why it was really important in the past. We've been really focused on recreation and then also habitat, but that recreation really elevates the populous areas and let some of the others go. So we're trying to be very sensitive to balancing urban and rural with this project.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point, and that crossed my mind too. As I don't want to be too human centric. If just focus on Como Lake or Lake Phelan at the expense of the Vermilion River, just because humans use Como. There's 1,000 other species that use vermilion that we want to keep around and happy. And so the way I kind of see this is almost like if there's a, I don't know, well, I'll leave it at that. I think I think you're approaching it the right way. Good. Councilmember Sterner, I think you had a comment to make. And I apologize, I can't see everybody, so just feel free to pipe up. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I was kind of like what Councilmember Fredson said. This is like really one of my passions. I wish I had like a work session on this where I sit around the table and could spend 8 hours on this. So we're kind of like brainstorming off the seat of our pants a little bit here. So if you take that information here. So one of my points would be it's probably easier to keep a body of water clean than it is to do cleanup with it. So sometimes I know if we can keep those bodies of water at risk, such as like the Vermilion River or so, it's going to be a better payback than trying to actually do a huge cleanup. And I'm also feeling that we're kind of like the glue that holds the 7 county together. So I feel like there's some lakes, without mentioning any names or what have you, but might have all their strong partners already, whether it's a strong nonprofit or it's a city or it's a regional park, community that maybe we could use some that don't have as many resources to assist with it, more that need us with it. The other thing I'm seeing too is like, what's the bottom 10 bodies of water? Because I'm thinking they might really need our help, like maybe a nice lake around, industrial place, or maybe in a rural area where there might be fertilizer going in, or even a lake, a body of water that's surrounded by residential fertilizer that comes in, or where a lot of salt is going in. But I kind of would like to see, like, maybe what are considered our 10 worst lakes too, to see, well, maybe do one of those break into it or what have you. And then looking at maybe does a list rotate a little bit, like, hey, those 20 were at the top of the list last time we did the cycle. Now we did good. We got people that will kind of maintain it. Let's go to another 20. So we're kind of like doing touches on all the bodies of water. At least we know what, the inventory, what we're dealing with. And let me just see. Oh yeah, and I guess so. The other one, I guess, when I look at priorities, I like the list here. I can't think of anything other on the list other than like transportation. Some of us are out in Vancouver, and transportation was used quite a bit with the lakes. With it, I know we do with Metropolitan Council with our other division is transportation. I could see that at some point as being transportation, coming down the St. Croix or the Minnesota River, where we're using transportation to get from one place to another, not just our buses. So it's something to look at. Yeah, let me just see what else. I don't go too much here. This is just another thing, maybe, and it's probably a random thought here, but I think some of our issue, just in general, when we talked about drinking water supply, I think even our Great Lakes that have Great Lakes, I mean, that are Great Lakes, and I mean our lakes in Minnesota. Um, we don't really know how good the water quality is, and we still have people that live by 10,000 lakes that are still going buying water in plastic bottles. And I think just the more we can market with our city partners how good the water is, and you're not really improving what you're getting. In fact, you're breaking less water quality when we're buying bottled water. But just when we're doing a quality water, I really feel that could really be helpful to continue to, get our word out how great our lakes are, what we're doing to make them great. Um, yeah, I think that's basically what I had, other than adding what some other people had. Environmental justice is big to me, and those type of things, and education and so on. But I really appreciate your work. It means a lot to me and the other council members. I'm sure. So keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Sterner. We are noting all of those comments, which are really helpful. I do just want to respond to a few of them. Actually, first was that we were hoping to figure out a way to make this more of a workshop, and it just didn't quite click. But I know there have been some discussions about looking at maybe more of a workshop format for some more of the water resource policy plan work coming up, and I think that will be addressed in a future meeting. So I am in agreement with you there, and so actually I would ask for the next slide. It's not the same as a workshop, but if you have any comments after this, we would really welcome your feedback. So please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'd be happy to meet more one-on-one with you as well. The other thing I wanted to say was that I think I mentioned this, but we really want this list to be a lens for and sort of a driver for our other work. But it also doesn't mean that we necessarily will be putting significant resources into even the waters that rank the highest. Lake Minnetonka is, a highly valued water in this region. It also receives a lot of resources from Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, from the cities around there. I don't think we are going to need to add on to monitoring Lake Minnetonka significantly if someone else is already doing it. So a lot of the point of this list is to say, this water is important. Let's make sure someone's giving it resources. Someone else is, we don't want to use our resources there. And so, in terms of rotating waters, I think that might make sense, especially like which we already do through our lake monitoring program, as we currently sort of look at the priority lakes that aren't being monitored by others and rotate around the metro every couple of years, trying to hit the ones that need those resources. So, the list will say, here's what is important. It will be, when we take our programs, say, how should we use our programs to best serve the region? We'll use the list to help us figure that out. But it doesn't mean that every single water on this list is going to get monitoring or is going to have education done on it every year. So I think that, but otherwise, thank you for the comments. And transportation is an interesting one. We talked about that, and I think we'll go back and think about that one. Agreed.
Thank you, Emily and team. Appreciate it.
Agreed. I think it was last summer, or maybe the summer before that, when I was on the Mississippi River. And if you spend 5 minutes on the river, you understand that that's a real working river in terms of transportation. There's a lot of business, industry activity moving up and down that river. And the other thing I think about when you mention transportation, Councilmember Sterner, is how in our parks work we are seeing more water trails, I think they're called, where people can dump in a kayak on one part of the Rum River and pop out on the other end. And these are really growing in popularity. So, and who knows how this really will be used, as you had these conversations with the other partners in the months ahead, I suspect they may be able to use this list to leverage resources from other entities. Maybe they include it in a grant application, um, or who knows? I think we will see. Maybe we can use it for our own internal purposes as we're scoring grants for parks or something, or our other equity work, or livable community grants, or who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Totally agreed. And we've been speaking with parks about this already, and we hope to talk with them more. So we have been already using this as a bit of a tool to bridge to other parts of the council. And we hope once it's completed that we'll be able to use it that way as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the Environment Committee for having me. And please follow up with any feedback and reach out anytime for a discussion.
You can count on it. Thank you. Very, very good job. Thanks, everybody. And that takes us to the general manager's report. Lisa, hello.
Good evening. No report today, but just a quick comment. As you've seen, we had two really engaging information items today, and the feedback and input and questions were all really good. ES is not only directly meeting our mission of protecting the public and health and environment, we also see the importance of our role to advance collective action in the region to support that purpose. So when it comes to making sure our water resources and our public health is protected, we do not see ourselves doing this alone. And so we really focus a lot on how do we partner with others in the region to make sure we can do the best in terms of our future. And having information about what the current situations are is a great place to start, and making sure that we're partnering with those other entities to be able to get good work done is something that staff have been doing a really great job on, and I want to salute them for their efforts. So, and you as a committee recognize the importance of that, so that your support in that direction is also well appreciated. So thank you.
Well, I'm looking up and down the agenda here, and every agenda item has some sort of partnership aspect to it, from partnering with metro cities to get that $5 million I&I grants, to partnering with the cities and counties, Anoka County and City of Fridley and Brooklyn Park, on that big project, and right on down the line. So you're absolutely right about that. With that, anything else?
No, that's it. It's been a cold night, so get cozy and stay warm.
Fire up that fireplace. Have a great evening, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye.